All right. So today I want to welcome everyone to another year of Be an Eco Hero. And my guest right now is Doug Perrine. And if you haven't heard of Doug, but maybe perhaps you've seen Captain Dave's book, Lily, A Gray Whale's Odyssey, some of Doug's beautiful photos are in there. But Doug is a professional photojournalist, and he has been specializing in marine wildlife since 1985. He's the author of 7 books, and he has had his writing and photographs published in Nat Geo, Time, BBC Wildlife, Natural History, and National Wildlife, among others. And he has won awards, taking first place overall in the BBC NHM Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. Doug is truly an amazing person, and I'm really very, very honored to have you here, Doug, as a guest and to share. You've got many experiences, but the thing that prompted our connection was that I had read with great interest the article that was published in Hakai magazine. Did I say that right?
I believe so.
Okay. On Coastal Science and Societies magazine. We'll put a link here for anyone who wants to follow that article. And Doug, the name of the article is "For Humpbacks, Bubbles Can Be Tools." And it's a fabulous article written by Doug, and the photos are by Doug. And we're looking here at one of the photos from the story, and that is just beautiful. I asked Doug to put one of his favorite photos from the article up to get us started. So there it is, just stunning. So Doug, hello.
Hi, Giselle.
He's
Pleased
coming
to be
to
with
us.
you.
Yes, he is coming to us from Kona, his home on the Big Island in Hawaii. And this picture, tell us where it was taken and what is happening in this photo.
Well, this was taken about 10 miles north of here, offshore of Makalavena, Hawaii, on the Big Island. Uh, we were out on my boat uh, watching whales, and we stopped, and one of the whales came over to the boat and was hanging around next to the boat. And eventually, I got my wife. I have a boat with very low gunnels, which is advantageous for photography. And I had my wife, grab my ankles, and I went over, put my mask on my face, went over the side of the boat with my camera. I mean, half over the side of the boat. So I was hanging in the water there on the side of the boat, and this whale and went swimming around under the boat. And after a while, it started blowing this thin stream of bubbles out of, looks like one of its blowholes, and swimming around in patterns so that as the bubbles rose up in curtains, they made shapes. And so they're mostly kind of spiral shapes. You can see right now it kind of looks like a figure 9. But if you look, see if you can see my cursor, that's where her eye is. And she's actually on her side looking upwards with her left eye at what she's doing, at her creation, which made me wonder a lot about what she's doing.
Right.
And I've wondered a lot, and I've talked to other people about this a lot. And of course, you can't know because you can't read an animal's mind. It could very well be that this is something that whales have an instinct to do, because she's gonna, if she ever engages in bubble netting in Alaska, which is where our Hawaii whales go to feed in the summer, she would be doing something like this on a much larger scale to create a bubble net to corral herrings in order to feed on them.
Right. So sorry, for those people who maybe aren't familiar with the behavior of bubble netting, it is something that we know humpbacks in particular, especially, have mastered the use of of making bubbles into what becomes a net for fish. And so, Doug, explain how that becomes a tool, how I thought your description of this was very profound. Go ahead.
Well, the net made out of bubbles functions very much like a purse seine net made out of nylon whatever twine type of material they make those out of. It's something that the herring or other small fish are afraid to swim through. So it's kind of a series of concentric spiral curtains that are all connected that get smaller and smaller and drive the fish closer together. And the whales are making noises at the same time, which probably also serve to terrify the fish. And it concentrates the fish into a very tight mass. And usually this is done as a group activity. So you've got one whale primarily creating the bubble net, and then the other whales and the whale that's making the net all together surface up through the middle of it. The herring are afraid to go out the sides of the net, and they have nowhere to go except into the air. But when they go into the air, they fall right back down into the whale's mouths, and quite spectacular to watch from the surface. And I have another picture that I can show. Maybe I should actually show that right now if I can.
Sure.
Which may be easier said than done.
That's okay. Take your time.
Okay, there's a, let's see where it is. Yeah, that's what it looks like in surface. When you have a really big school of herring in here, you'd see herring, just showering out of the water all through this area. That's what I was hoping for. I think we've got maybe one herring. There's another herring. There's a few
birds,
in here.
the birds are standing by waiting.
And yeah, these whales, okay, what you're looking at right here is the upper jaw of the whale with the baleen hanging down, and that's what traps the herring inside when they expel the water. Yeah. These kind of striped structures, those are the throat pleats, which enable their throats to open like accordions. So they take this huge amount of water, like a swimming pool volume of water, into their mouth, then close it most of the way with just the baleen blocking the opening, and squeeze the water out, and that traps the fish on the inside of the baleen. And then they bring their tongue up to swallow the fish.
Now, I know that blue whales, like the one behind me, they can eat up to 4 tons of krill a day. Humpbacks, do we know how much they can eat by way of volume a day?
There are figures on that, but I don't keep them in my head. I'm sorry.
That's
okay. It would be a large number. It wouldn't be anywhere comparable to a blue whale.
Blue whale,
yeah. It would be a large number.
I would think it would be a good ton based on the size of a humpback. But
yeah, so and consider that they're only feeding for usually half a year or less, and that has to power them for the whole year. Right. So when they're finished feeding in Alaska, then they have to, without feeding or with very little feeding, swim 3,000 miles to Hawaii, then engage in these very competitive courtship rituals, which may involve jumping out of the water. So that's propelling 40 tons of mass completely out of the water repeatedly, fighting with other whales, so forth. If it's a female, she may give birth and then have to nurse her calf and grow that calf from 1.5 tons up to maybe 15 tons, and then swim 3,000 miles back to Alaska. Amazing. All on the food that they've stored in their bodies from their summertime feeding.
Amazing. So, Doug, one of the other things about the article was that I was familiar with bubble netting and the concept of it being used as a tool. But in the article that you wrote, there were some other possible uses of their bubble making, and that you compared to a little bit like a Swiss Army knife, but not quite. Can you tell us a little bit more about what else bubbles are used for?
Sure. And I was proposing that bubbles can be used as tools in many other contexts. Now, the bubble net as a tool was, I think, first proclaimed in 1989 or so, and since then has gained widespread acceptance that most biologists accept that this is a legitimate tool use. I was proposing that humpbacks use tools in all kinds of different ways. This is a bubble stream. So what you're looking at in this picture is, okay, here in the lower right, we have a mature female with a calf that's, probably a few weeks old. And this is a male that we refer to as the escort, because he has been accompanying her, hoping to mate with her if she comes into heat, which is unlikely because she has a calf. But about 10% of females who have calves in any particular year will calf again the next year. So about 1 out of 10 will mate and then have another calf a year later. So that's what he's hoping for. But he's not alone. These two males are trying to cut in on the action. They want to be the ones to mate with her if she decides to mate. And he wants to make sure they're not. So he's swimming at them, releasing this stream of bubbles, which you will see a lot of references in the scientific literature to this as a bubble screen that he uses to block their view of the female so that they can't find the female. And that seems quite reasonable if this is your only view of it. But if you've seen it underwater, let me see if I've got a like this, then it doesn't seem so plausible. In this case, this is the escort right here, blowing bubbles, the female's here. And the two challengers, this is a different group, but similar situation. This two challengers are back here, just outside the range of visibility. His bubbles are doing nothing to block their view of the female. So I see this more as a sign of aggression.
Yeah.
I think you're very familiar with the elephant seals over there in California, and they use those noses of theirs as resonating chambers, and they get up high and flap their noses around and inflate them and make noises with them. I see this as that same type of thing, and you've got to figure that lungs are the size of the lungs are proportional to the size of the body, so it could be a way that he's showing his size. And also his strength and endurance by how much air he can blow out and still keep swimming and fighting. So I see it as a sort of a threat display. But again, we don't know. We don't know what's in the animals' heads, and a lot of times animals and people aren't really sure why we're doing what we're doing because it's more instinctive. It just kind of comes naturally. So that's one way that whales are known to use bubbles, and I would call that a tool too, because a bubble is a physical object that can be manipulated.
Yeah. Now, in the article, you raised a really interesting point that people who had been taking video of these animals when they're just alone had never witnessed a bubble ring just amongst the whales. Is that correct? But they do see it being, they do see them being made when they're around humans. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, and let me explain how they could observe whales where there are no humans around. That's done with drones.
Right.
So drones have revolutionized the study of whale behavior, as you know, as Dave has made great use of. So they've got now thousands of hours of drone footage of whales with no humans around them, and they've never seen a bubble ring. Of course, someday that might happen, and we'll have to revise what we're saying about it. So we have seen bubble rings by whales where there are no other whales around, as in the picture that you're seeing on my screen now. We've also seen whales blow bubble rings where there were other whales right next to them. But in each case, there was a boat and people also in the vicinity. So it's, from what we know now and everything we've documented, it's the behavior that whales do in the vicinity of humans and or boats. And in this case, as with this picture, I want you to notice the surface of the water.
Yeah.
It's not only in the picture, but it's also curved, which tells you I'm photographing with a fisheye lens that's right at the surface, which means I'm in the boat and the camera's underwater. So these whales don't see a human, they see a boat. Same here. This whale, I'm leaning over the side, hanging my camera in the water. So this whale is interacting with the boat. It may or may not know that it knows that there's humans on the boat because it was spy hopping earlier. And it can probably hear us. And as you can imagine, my passengers were quite excited. They were making a bit of noise. But this whale swam towards the boat probably 7 times, making bubble rings. And sometimes it would be 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, maybe more. I didn't count all. This is a first bubble ring that's kind of disintegrating, and this is the second bubble ring coming out here. And this whale made a 3rd bubble ring on this pass before it got to the boat. It never made the bubble rings when it was swimming away from the boat or swimming off in some other direction, only when swimming towards the boat. And each time it did that, it would come right up to the boat and sometimes surface right next to the boat. So you would have to,
So what's your
guess
theory?
it's that it could be some type of communication or trying to establish contact at the very least. I should mention, when I started writing this article for Hakai, I started reaching out to marine mammal scientists who study humpback whales to get their input on it. And in the course of this, I got involved with 2 scientific papers that were being published on exactly the phenomena that I was writing about.
Wow.
Great. So this one, in this case, the authors concluded that they could rule out feeding and rule out a couple other possibilities, but that they could not rule out plague because it had all the attributes of plague, as far as having no particular purpose that was obvious, and involved an object, a toy of sorts.
It's fascinating. I just love it. It reminded me so much of the dolphins blowing their bubble rings.
Yes, and we're considering that to be analogous. And we make a lot of mention of dolphin bubble rings in the paper. But, there's individual play and there's group play. So the question is this individual play? But it's only doing it when it's coming towards us, so it seems directed at us. So it could be a sort of group play. So it may have been hoping for a response, but we're not sure what type of response. We didn't have the ability to create bubble rings, but that's coming.
I was going to say, is that coming? Is it coming?
That's Fred Sharp, who's the lead author of the paper, is trying to get a bubble ring machine manufactured that he can bring to Hawaii and use to blow bubble rings back at whales if they do this to us again.
Very fun.
So it could be a sort of communication as well, but that doesn't rule out play.
Yeah. Fascinating. I wonder too, if it's how sometimes you see a certain thing and you say a word, and maybe it's like, wow, or, I don't know, some kind of exclamation, and that's reserved for when you see that particular thing. And I wonder if when the whale sees, not all whales, but when some whales see a human, that they don't release air in a certain way that somehow forms a shape like that. I don't know. Or it could be a game. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to say this is not the usual way that a whale reacts to humans. And also point out that this encounter lasted 3 hours. So throughout the 3-hour period, the whale was occasionally coming towards us blowing these bubble rings.
Wow.
So I'm going to make a different analogy here.
Yes.
Do you know what SETI is? Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where we're listening for radio waves or other signals coming from outer space where they might try to communicate with us. But it's kind of been discredited, but there was an offshoot project called METI, which is Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where they were sending radio waves from Earth out into the cosmos, hoping that people are, extraterrestrials at the other end would receive those and go, oh, there's intelligent life on Earth. Well, I had to wonder, is this a type of METI?
Yeah.
Is this whale thinking, I mean, you have to consider that from a whale's point of view, a boat is kind of like a spaceship that just landed in his water planet, and we're the aliens on the spaceship.
Yeah.
So if he wants to convince us that he's intelligent and wants to establish some type of communication with us, what could he do that we would understand, that we would look at it and go, oh, well, that's deliberate, and it's directed at us.
Right. That's amazing. I love that. I love that theory. I love that theory. Having been, as you and I were talking about earlier, before we started the official call, been to San Ignacio, and had those up close experiences, knowing the kind of contact that these animals want to have, it's unbelievable. So it wouldn't be surprising at all to see that in these animals.
It really came down to me the last day we were there when this storm came up. We went out anyway, and we contacted a couple of whales, and so we shut the engines off. And normally you'd just be kind of bobbing there, but this fierce wind was blowing and it was pushing us really fast. We were sailing across the lagoon in front of the wind, and these whales were chasing us, and they kept swimming up to the boat,
Don't go. We want you to stay.
For whatever crazy reason of their own, they wanted to be next to the boat interacting with us. And you've experienced that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are things that 20 years ago scientists would have poo-pooed, but you can't deny it. Anybody who's been in San Ignacio knows that the whales are deliberately interacting with humans out of their own desire to do so.
Yes. Wow. Some of the other things you mentioned in the article, besides communication and dominance, was possibly even as this picture. Exactly. Go ahead and describe this.
Well, I believe this is courtship behavior. And here we have the rear half of a female whale. It was a similar situation. This was in Maui, and this is where I used to volunteer with the research group. So we're out there doing whale research. We stopped the boat, and the female had 2 male escorts, and she swam over, I'm sorry, 3. There was an escort and 2 challengers again. And she swam over to the boat, which is something that's not unusual when you have a competitive group, that the female will come get next to a boat. Possibly it's kind of a challenge to the males to see who's brave enough to come over this scary boat thing with me. Or maybe she's trying to use it as a shield. We don't completely understand it, but it's not an extremely rare behavior. Well, the male escort came behind her, and as you can see, is swimming up under her from behind and releasing a thin stream of bubbles. And when he came a little bit further, those bubbles were coming up right under her genital area where they were tickling her. And when I put this in my article and sent it over to Whale Trust on Maui to say, what do you think of that? And they came back and said, how did you find out about our paper? And I said, what paper? Well, they had a video of this same thing.
Wow.
And their paper was just published, I believe, in Marine Mammal Science. I could be mistaken, but just in November of last year, as I was working on this article, their paper was published.
Wow.
Describing this exact behavior.
That's amazing. I love it.
And then one of the co-authors on the Bubble Ring paper also brought up that she had seen female humpbacks using their pectoral fins, and she had photographs of this. So they would lift their pectoral fins out of the water and bring down curtains of bubbles into the water and push those bubbles under their genital area and kind of bathe in the bubble bath, if you will, but particularly seem to be stimulating their own genitals.
Huh.
So the Whale Trust group, Megan Jones and her co-authors, hypothesized that it might, if the whale is pregnant, it might help to stimulate um, some of the hormones that come out giving birth. I don't have the paper in front of me, so I'm doing a terrible job
Sure.
explaining
That's
this. But
okay.
they
Yeah.
had several hypotheses for why it might work. But the most likely one to me is that this is a male stimulating a female, hoping to excite her and bring her into heat.
Well, we all know that we like bubble baths, we like jacuzzis, it feels good. And,
Yeah,
so it's a beautiful thing to see them using this. Doug, I wanted to just kind of inspire people. So can we talk a little bit about your own journey?
sure.
Tell me how you got started in all of this. When was the first time that you had a connection with wild animals and kind of made you think, wow, I want to do this?
That would be hard to pinpoint because I can remember from the time I was a small child looking uh, at lines of ants crawling up the side of the door frame at our house, each one exactly following the path of the one in front of it, and wondering how they did that. Of course, at that time, I hadn't read E.O. Wilson, and I don't think, he's only maybe 10 years older than me or was, so he probably hadn't written anything about ants and scent trails yet, so nobody knew. But I was wondering about that, and I remember asking my mother, and she came over with a can of spray insecticide and solved the problem to her satisfaction. My first connection with the ocean would have been years later when I grew up in Texas, by the way, in Dallas, so completely landlocked.
Yeah.
And we took a family vacation to Galveston, and the water there in the Gulf of Mexico in the summertime, it was like bath water. So I remember going out, wading out with my father in the evening into the Gulf of Mexico, and these small fish were jumping out of the water and hitting me in the chest, and I was just enthralled. I was in love. I thought the fish loved me back, and that's surely. Of course, years later, I realized there must have been a barracuda chasing them around. That's why they were jumping out of the water. So my father was right to not let me go back there later that night by myself, but that's what I wanted to do. And ever since that experience, I wanted to spend my life in the ocean, which is why I came to the University of Hawaii for college and studied there, and became a scuba instructor, and then studied again at University of Miami, marine biology. But I didn't, in one of life's odd twists, I didn't want to spend my life sitting in front of a computer. So I decided to get out of doing marine science and get into writing about it. So I would go talk to scientists who are doing interesting research and then sort of act as their translator to the public. Right. And in those days before digital photography, most scientists were not very good photographers, and a lot of them couldn't speak anything other than scientific lingo. So that worked out well for me, taking the pictures and writing the stories for many years.
Wonderful. Well, your work is just fantastic. I wonder, we've talked a lot about some of the different things that these animals do, which involve instinct. So what's your thought on instinct? Where do you think it comes from?
Well, that's a huge question.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But Yeah, instincts obviously are in your hardwiring and in your genes somewhere. So we all have instincts, behaviors that we're driven to do, and it's
So you think instinct is genetically hardwired then?
well, pretty much by definition, because if you learn it, then it's not an instinct; it's a learned behavior.
Right,
It's
right.
and of course, anybody that's been a little boy with no interest in girls, or a little girl with no interest in boys, or even all the other possible permutations of that, and has had their attitude completely change after passing through puberty, realizes that we have instincts that are controlled by hormones, and
Right.
hormones are coded by our genes. And this free will exists to some extent, but a lot of it is
Hardwired.
has been planned out for us by our evolution. And
Yeah.
the more we learn about wild animals, the more we learn that they're in a continuum that we are part of, and that everything we do, we share with them, and vice versa. So we, when I was in graduate school studying biology, they grudgingly admitted that chimpanzees use tools, but they didn't think any other animals could use tools. They was absolutely verboten to say that animals had emotions. We were taught that fish didn't feel any pain,
Right.
and that's all gone by the wayside now.
Yeah.
And I would like to recommend to all your readers, if I can go to another part of my screen for a moment. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah. I would like to recommend this book, and actually every book that Frans DeWaal has ever written. But this one, Mama's Last Hug, in particular, is about animal emotions. And he makes what I consider an absolutely ironclad case that humans have emotions because we inherited them from our earliest ancestors. I'm
Mm.
not talking about our earliest common ancestor with chimpanzees or other primates. I'm talking about going all the way back
Mm.
past fish to past reptiles to fish, and probably beyond that.
Mm.
Um, if I've got some other books to, oops, I don't know what I did with the other one. I've got at least one other book here that I'll hold up when you put me back on full screen.
Okay.
But
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time, and you can go ahead and turn that off if you'd like. And um, just really appreciate you taking the time to be with us and share some of this beautiful photography and your stories. They're very enlightening, and um, I hope that if there's anyone out there who loves watching trails of ants and or has had an experience in the ocean where they felt just a connection with fish, that they pursue that. You know, there's so many great, um, so much great science coming out that talks about the benefits of being outside, being in connection with nature. And so we just encourage everyone to get out there and make that connection themselves, whether it's in the woods or the mountains or the rivers or the ocean or with animals. It's all very powerful. So thank you for that time. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in Kona.
Thanks, Giselle. If you got a few more minutes and see if you can fit it in, I
Sure.
actually, if I can bring it up, I will show some other. Now maybe I can't bring it up. Okay, yeah. Let me show a couple other pictures
Okay.
here. Yeah. So I wanted to mention that after I left marine science professionally, I continued to be involved with it on an amateur basis. And this is something that any of your viewers there that spend a lot of time in nature can do.
Yeah,
Because
especially.
we actually know so little about wild animals and our planet now that if you spend a lot of time in nature, you're likely going to see things that nobody's seen before. And if you read and talk to people that are studying those things, then you'll find out what they are. And if you have a camera, which everybody does now in your phone, you can record it. So
Yes.
I wanted to mention, even though I'm technically not a marine scientist anymore, I've got 2 papers in progress with peer-reviewed journals and 2 that are already in print. And this is what was the basis of one of them. This is a school of dog snappers in Belize doing a group spawning, and that behavior had not been described before. So when I showed this picture to somebody who was studying the snappers, said, let's go to press, let's write it up. And we did. And this is another one. I was diving in Thailand. On a night dive, I saw this snail with the part of its body reaching up, way up into this parrotfish's mouth. The parrotfish was sound asleep in the reef. And it turned out that's the snail's proboscis, excuse me, which has a piercing tip at the end. And it actually pokes a hole in the tissue of the parrotfish's mouth and sucks the fluids out. So this was the discovery of vampire snails. And that became another scientific publication.
Oh my
So,
gosh. So
so
so the snail has a proboscis that can pierce the flesh of a fish?
yes, and this was not a new species of snail, but nobody, up till this point, nobody knew what they fed on, because obviously their gut contents didn't include any hard parts. It's only, blood and
Had
fish.
it been called a vampire snail prior to this?
No, I coined that term. So I'm just telling you, anybody, whether you're a scuba diver or a bird
Right,
watcher or
right.
anybody that goes in nature, you can make discoveries. And
Wow.
most of the animals on this planet have still not been officially discovered and given a scientific name. So you can discover new species, you can discover new behaviors, you can, get to name the snail or whatever you find out about. Just
Wow.
keep your
That's
eyes
cool.
open, keep reading about the things that you like to watch, and you may find something new.
I
And
love
and,
that, Doug. Thank
and
you. I
I'll
think
I'll put in a quick plug for something any of your people can do. There's a new program called Walrus Detective that the World Wildlife Fund is trying to get citizen scientists involved with, where you count the walruses in satellite photos from space so that they can try to calculate what the population of North Atlantic walruses is. So that's something you can do from your home. You don't even have to go out in nature to get involved in
really.
that
So what do they
program.
do? Assign you a little area and it's your job to count the walruses in that area?
I believe they give you a folder of satellite pictures, and yeah, you count the number of walruses. Then there's I think hundreds of thousands of these pictures. So they get enough people involved, they can average the numbers out and get a figure for the population, which would be impossible by any other method they've thought of.
That's amazing. I will definitely will put that in the end credits here. So we have Walrus Detective. We also have Happy Whale, where people can
Yeah,
post
yeah, Happy
some
Whale is
great
great.
citizen science stuff. Are you
And
aware of any other great sites that we can direct people to?
there's a lot of them. There's not one particular one I can think of, but I can tell you that we got a picture that showed the fluke of this whale and put it in with Happy Whale, and we were able to determine that it was a yearling. That and we could tell from my pictures it was female by the anatomy, but it had previously been sighted in Maui, I think a week and a half earlier.
I love it.
So yeah, you can not only do you contribute when you send stuff to Happy Whale, but you also get information back. You get the
Right,
whale's whole history in some cases.
right. Yeah, we try to put as much as we can up there and, just keep building that great database. So, well, thank you, Doug. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, unless you wanted to kind of repeat the discussion we had on about this one before you started recording. Otherwise, I think we're pretty much done.
I think we recapped it, so I think we're good.
Okay.
This was beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time